Obviously, to access the brake pads, we need to get the wheel out of the way. In this case, we're lucky enough to have a hoist. We've got the unit up at eye level, but it's not really any more difficult to do right off the ground. Jack the unit up slightly, just enough to get the wheels off the ground, get the wheels off the unit, and then we can get at everything we need to. So once the wheel's removed, we can see our brake caliper here, the brake pad that's underneath. This entire assembly slides back and forth on these pins. So we need to get these loosened off, get this caliper out of here so we can replace these brake pads. So we've removed our two T40 Torx bolts that are holding the bracket in place. We've loosened off our 5mm Allen keys. It's just easier to do this when the bracket's in place than trying to do it when it's loose in your hand later on. And now we're able to remove the entire caliper. And that exposes both brake pads and will allow us to remove them. With the caliper now easily accessible, we can hand unloosen the set screws and get them right out of the way. While we're doing that, we should note that although this is a 2013 Can-Am, this is a very similar job on any brand of ATV. You're going to be looking for two main bolts that hold the caliper assembly to the machine and then slide the entire caliper off the disc. Look for whatever means of set pins or holding the pads in place, remove them, and then you should be able to just easily swap out the pads themselves. So with the pins removed, we can now easily remove these brake pads. As you can see, the brake pad material is completely gone. We're metal on metal, so it's a good thing we're doing this. Now before we remove the inner pad, we want to make sure that this brake cylinder is pushed all the way back into place. And to do that, you can use C-clamp vice grips or a C-clamp itself. And you simply just want to tighten that down until it goes back to its resting place. You can see it moving there. If you don't do this, you put the new pads on, you're going to have about a ½ an inch more pad material, and it isn't going to go back on the rotor. So with the pad removed, we can actually compare it to the replacement pad. These are a brand called Rock Hard, and you can see there's ample material on here. They look like a really good product, and obviously we've got a lot more meat on here than what we started with. So this is going to take this machine from simply chattering and the loss of braking power to some serious stopping. In any caliper system, there's going to be two pins that the caliper and the pads slide back and forth on when you apply and release the brakes. The last thing you want to happen is for things to get seized up or stuck in here, causing premature brake pad wear because the brake pad doesn't have the opportunity to get away from the rotor. So we're going to apply some anti-seize compound to these pins, as well as an area on the pad themselves where they come into contact with the caliper. So we're all ready for reassembly. First we start with the inner pad with our anti-seize compound. Next we place the outer pad, and then the pins are what's going to hold that into place. We can get our pins finger tight, and then later on when we've got this all fastened, we can tighten them down. It's much easier at that point. So the next step, as you can see, we do have a little bit of a gap here, and that's where our rotor is going to slide. So we want to position it on top of the rotor, and if we're lucky, we can get the rotor to slide between the brand new pads. And we slide the unit back down into place, and now we can put in our set bolts. And the only thing left is to tighten everything up. Most late model ATVs are using the disc brake system. Fairly easy to replace. As you can see, you're basically looking for two main bolts that are holding the caliper to the chassis, and then there's going to be some set screws. We need to get that all out of the way, change out the pads, push back the caliper back into place, and then put everything back together in the reverse order. Obviously, the other side, it's exactly the same thing. So now we're going to move on to the back. It's a little bit different, but not that different. This particular machine has a single rear brake disc inboard that is basically stopping the power to the rear wheels ahead of the differential. So it's effectively braking both back wheels at the same time. Other machines will have outboard just the same as the front, sometimes on one side, sometimes on both. But in any case, you're basically doing the same procedure. You're needing to remove this caliper assembly. And in this case, we've got two bolts right here and right here. We're going to loosen those off, and that's going to allow us to pull this assembly out and change the pads pretty much exactly like we did on the front. We've removed the bolts. This is ready to take off. Simple back and forth action. And there we have it. From this point forward, the operation is exactly the same as the front. Pull out your pins, remove your pads, reset the brake caliper, grease everything up with anti-seize compound, and reassemble. We've completed our brake job. This is a fairly straightforward procedure for what you might call a backyard mechanic. There really aren't any special tools involved short of a C-clamp or C-clamp type vice grip. I should point out, when you're using the C-clamp, make sure you do have one of the old brake pads in between the clamp and the piston. You don't want to push directly on the piston, because every now and then that piston, it won't go in quite straight and it'll mark the side. So make sure you have that brake pad on there and get it all the way in. This is the kind of job that you would recommend someone with a level 2 or 3 experience. It is a little more involved than simply taking off some bolts, but not too serious. If you want to save some money, have a go at this. If you're unsure, maybe have a friend who's a mechanic come over and inspect your work before you go for a ride. But this is a great place to start getting some maintenance done at home and saving yourself some money in the long run.